Are you new to crochet? Are you feeling overwhelmed by what yarn to buy for your projects? In this video, I'll share 5 common mistakes beginners often make when buying yarn, so you can avoid them and feel more confident about what to grab from the yarn aisle. Hi, I'm Rose from Mellow Yarns Crochet, and if you're new here, welcome to my channel. If you're returning, welcome back. I'm so happy to have you here. Early on in my crochet journey, I was maybe 1-2 projects deep at this point. I went to my local mall and Lincraft was having a closing down sale. For any American viewers, Lincraft is kind of like a Joann's or a Michael's. Everything was 50% off. Excited to be able to stock up on supplies for my new hobby, I filled my basket with yarn and patted myself on the back for being so savvy. I now know that I made lots of terrible yarn decisions that day because I didn't really know what I was buying. If you're new to crochet and feeling overwhelmed about what yarn to buy, then keep watching and I'll share all of the mistakes that I made when I was a beginner so you don't have to. I'm going to grab a cup of tea and my latest project to work on during this video. So grab a cozy spot, put the kettle on, pick up your own project, and let's crochet together while we yarn about yarn. So this afternoon I'm working on my Magnus cardigan. This is a pattern by Megan Makes Do, and I've included a link to the pattern in the description as well as to her YouTube channel. I got this as part of a kit from Lion Brand's website, which makes it super easy because you just choose the colours that you want and they send you the pattern and all of the yarn that you need. Megan uses the colour Arrowwood as her contrasting colour, which is sort of a mustardy yellow, but that's not really my colour. So instead I'm using Riverside, which is a kind of navy blue. So I finished the main section of the cardigan. This is the bottom ribbing here, and then these are the armholes here. So I'm just about to start working on the sleeves today. So grab your own project, a cup of tea, settle into a cozy spot, and come crochet with me while we yarn about yarn. Mistake number 1, not buying the right quantity. That day at Lincraft, as I wandered around the store, I just threw balls of yarn that I like the look of into my basket. But my biggest mistake was that I only bought 1, sometimes 2 balls of any one type of yarn. I just didn't appreciate how much yarn it actually takes to make anything decent. 1 ball of yarn will give you a headband or 2, or maybe a beanie at a stretch, but not a lot else. Now, if you're brand new, I would suggest actually starting with small projects, and this is something I expand on more in my video about how to learn to crochet, which I'll link in the description below. So this isn't necessarily a bad thing when you're starting out to grab small quantities of yarn, but maybe you just don't buy 10 individual balls of yarn like I did, because at some point you're going to want to make something bigger than a beanie. These days, I'll try to only buy yarn when I have a specific project or pattern already in mind, so I know exactly how much yarn I'll need. But there'll always be those circumstances where you pop into your local yarn store and see a beautiful yarn that you just have to have, even if you don't yet know what you'll use it for. In those circumstances, I find this guide from Lion Brand super handy, as it gives you a rough idea about how much yarn you'll need based on what kind of project you're doing, whether it's a blanket or a sweater, and what yarn weight you're using. Also, if you're in Australia and New Zealand, I've made a version of this guide that has Australian sizing in it. Feel free to check out the description below to get a link to get a free copy of that guide. This leads nicely into the second mistake, which is another reason why you ideally want to get the right quantity of yarn for your project, and that's dye lots. So a dye lot is basically a batch of yarn that's been dyed all together in the same lot. If you check your yarn label, you'll see the dye lot shown as a number. Balls of yarn with the same dye lot were dyed together. So why does this matter? Well, yarns that were dyed in different batches can vary quite a bit, even if they're the same colour and have the same colour name on their label. This is probably less of a risk with acrylic yarns, but natural variation within natural fibres like wool and cotton can often result in quite significant variations of colour between batches. So ideally you want to buy all of the yarn for your project from the same dye lot, which is another reason why it's best to get the right amount of yarn from the get-go. The third mistake, not buying the right colours. This is a common one you've probably already heard before, but generally darker yarns, especially black yarns, are much harder to work with than lighter coloured yarns. This is because it's quite hard to see the different parts of the stitch with a dark yarn, and therefore where to put your hook. You'll also want to avoid any novelty yarns when you're starting out, like fake fur or ribbon yarn, until you've got a little bit more experience under your belt. I would also avoid anything too fuzzy, at least for your first 1 or 2 projects. Mistake number 4, not buying the right weight of yarn. The other really common mistake beginners make is not realizing just what a difference the yarn weight can make to how quickly a project will work up. Yarn weight could be its own separate video, but in summary, yarns vary in terms of how thick they are, ranging usually from a 2-ply or a lace weight yarn right through to super bulky or 14-ply yarn. I wouldn't choose a super bulky yarn as a newbie, as they can be quite hard to work with. But other than that, you generally want to err towards heavier yarn weights, anything really from an 8-ply or a DK up. And this is just because making anything in a lighter weight yarn, like a 4-ply, will just take a really long time, especially if you're not the fastest at crocheting just yet. And the 5th mistake, not feeling the yarn. The other key mistake I made that day at Lincraft was assuming that all acrylic yarns are rubbish and all wool yarns are great. There are lots of reasons to choose natural fibres like wool and cotton over man-made fibres, including the environmental impacts. But there's a lot more nuance to it than just all wool yarn is great and all acrylic yarn is rubbish. Some acrylic yarns are plasticky, squeaky and rough, but some are billowy and soft and lovely. Some wool can be quite scratchy and rough, but others can be really soft and squishy. So how do you know if a yarn is any good or not? I think the best way is just to feel it, which is why it's always a good idea to go out to yarn stores when you're starting out rather than buying online. Have a feel of the yarn. Do you like how it feels? Would you feel comfortable wearing this against your skin if you're going to be making a wearable? Does it seem to glide across your fingers nicely? Does it look overly matte or overly shiny? There's no right or wrong here. It's really just whatever is your personal preference. But I really wanted to emphasize this point because if you don't like the yarn, even if it's a gift for somebody else, you won't enjoy crocheting with it. If you can't get to yarn stores, or even if you can, I also suggest watching or reading yarn reviews to learn more about a yarn before you buy it up in bulk. That's all for today's video. I hope you found it useful and that you have a much better yarn buying experience than I did when I was starting out. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe for more crochets with me and top tips for beginner crocheters. Happy crafting!